What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Logos Podcast. This is Max.
This is Joey.
And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about Stoicism and its relationship to the gospel. Both things which are daunting. The gospel, which I say is more beautiful and daunting. Nevertheless, I think Stoicism is important. We think Stoicism is important.
Yeah.
But before we get into that conversation, Joey, do what you do, homie.
Again, I don't know how I got this job, but welcome to Logos Podcast. I'm glad you're here. Max and I are two seminarians. We're starting to be priests for the Roman Catholic Church. And this show is about really introducing you to the intellectual and spiritual tradition of the Catholic Church, which we find quite beautiful and rich.
Yeah, we do.
And
are giving our life to.
Which we're giving our life to.
Yeah.
And hopefully that brings you into an encounter with the Logos himself, the Logos who became flesh, Jesus Christ. So that's what this show is about. Thanks. We're glad you're here. If you want to support what we're doing, you can follow us on all our social media. We have Instagram, TikTok. We're on YouTube, so check us out on YouTube. We have a website. All that's linked below. Also, if you want to support our project, you can go to www.patreon.com/logospodcast, and you become a monthly donor. Thank you to all our new monthly donors. We're so appreciative of the support that you're giving us. You're allowing us to continue producing content, and we're doing this for you. So thank you. All of our listeners are in our prayers. And yeah, so I'm excited for this episode. Before we start, though, how the heck you doing? Even though I already know the answer to that question because we've been around each other a lot for the last week.
Actually, Joey just got back from my hometown, which is down south.
Yeah.
Got to experience some of that southern living, boy. And I really think he liked it. Is it true?
It's true. I had a great time.
Yeah.
I had a great time.
So, yeah, we experienced a lot of things.
Happy Easter, by the way,
guys,
to all our listeners.
Rejoice.
Hallelujah.
Live in hope. Live in hope.
He is risen.
Yes, right. So, yeah, man, things are well. You know how it is. School started back up, so we had 2 weeks off for Easter.
Which is why we haven't been producing Logos.
No, and it's actually been kind of nice just taking a break and serving our local parishes and kind of living the Easter season. It's been great, which we're still living, by the way, for the next 40-something days.
Heck yeah.
And so get up in there. Eat that meat.
Lent is 40 days. Easter
is
50 days.
Just because our Lord is a little petty like that. Let him know what's good for 50 days.
No, it's because we're not Stoics. We're Christians.
That's right. Good call. But yeah, man, how are you doing?
I'm good. I had met your family, parts of your family before, but hadn't spent a lot of time around them, so I got to go down, and the weather was a little bit better than it is here up north. That we're coming from like 75 and sunny, and now where we are, it's like 40 degree, and I think it was hailing outside when I walked in.
This place is hellish in general.
Okay, that's not true.
Okay, sorry.
But we golfed with your brother. We went hiking and jumped in a really cold river.
Right, we did.
Next to a waterfall. That was pretty sweet. And
had some Mexican food again.
Good Mexican food.
So last time it was tamales. This time it was taquitos.
Taquitos. What else?
Con lechuga, tomate,
y enchiladas de Durango, ¿verdad?
Enchiladas de Durango, which is where my parents are from natively. And so
those were good.
Yeah. So anyways, that's life right now.
Yeah, so enjoying Easter, enjoying the sad the octave is over, but happy that we have a lot more time to celebrate the resurrection.
We're celebrating.
Yeah, so
cool.
Life is good. Now, let's talk about Stoicism.
Cool.
So why, first of all, why are we talking about this? Actually, you were the one who brought this. You suggested that we talk about this.
Right.
So why did you want to have an episode on Stoicism?
Well, I think one thing is Stoicism has been around for a very long time. Okay.
Yeah, it has.
On the kind of intellectual scale, as a thinking system, as a philosophical system, it's been in existence for a very long time. But I've seen kind of popularity in culture and social media. Right. I've seen a huge influence on, I know, as of recently, like Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
Right. Matthew McConaughey and his Green Light book.
Have you read that?
I have. Well, I listened to it on audiobook.
Okay.
But in it, he has a lot of kind of Stoic motifs.
Okay.
Right. So that's like another one. Joe Rogan has mentioned it. Recently, he interviewed Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
Who has a show, The Daily Stoic. A lot of really good content.
And he's written a lot of books, too.
He's written a lot of books. He's spoken to all kinds of professional sports players.
He's taken an MBA, military. He's given talks to the military and stuff.
And to vice presidents. And so he's kind of around. And so all that to say, I'm seeing a big move right now with kind of a Stoic influence. And even in a lot of psychology. Behavioral psychology's taken this up as a way to kind of engage the world and to better people's lives, and for all intents and purposes, with a good motive.
It is funny. Like we have when we took ancient philosophy, our professor, Dr. Fortner, he would often comment on the fact that a lot of modern and contemporary philosophies are just reiterations of the ancient philosophies.
Yeah.
And if you ask him about what he thinks about a certain topic that's being discussed today, he'll always be able to interpret it and be able to say something like, oh, like this person talked about that in 300 BC or something like that. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, but it is funny how these old philosophical systems, they stay with us.
They make their way.
And Stoicism, we're going to see, there's a lot of really good aspects to it.
Yeah, and to that point you just made, it's interesting. I was watching a interview with Joe Rogan just yesterday, and I can't remember who the other guy was on. It wasn't Ryan Holiday. It was another guy, and they were talking about Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. And one of the things that said guest critiqued or commented on was, when I started looking into Stoicism, I was kind of like, wait a second, I've seen this before. So I think this particular guest's field was psychology, and he was like, I hate the fact that a lot of the things we're studying now and articulating in this kind of scientific forum has already to some extent been articulated previously.
And we think we're super new and original.
Right. And so like to Dr. Fortner's attitude, and which we share, and I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the things we encounter and are popular are not new. And in fact, the old is becoming kind of the trend.
Yeah.
So which is one of the reasons why I think I wanted to talk about Stoicism, and I think you share in that same sentiment.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. So what we want to do is we want to just kind of give a brief, define Stoicism, outline some of its basic principles.
Yeah.
Then we want to compare that to the gospel and Christianity, talk about its encounter with Christianity historically. And then we want to assess some of these more contemporary formulations of Stoic principles. So that's kind of where we're headed. Yeah. So I guess we should talk about what is Stoicism. We should define it.
So as a kind of a definition here, again, Stoicism is a big topic. It has a lot of nuanced
It's really a
position.
Holistic philosophy, right?
It is. It's a kind of, yes, right. And it really is a philosophical system. And so we're only going to touch kind of the tip of the iceberg here, if you will. And so what is Stoicism? Stoicism was one of the dominant philosophical systems of the Hellenistic period, right? So the times of the Greeks.
Before the Roman Empire, right? But it remained popular into the Roman Empire.
Right. And it's, again, peeking its head kind of now in a lot of ways. The name derives from the porch, Stoa, in the Agora at Athens, where the first generations of Stoic philosophers congregated in lectures. So it was kind of a porch where they all together talked about these things.
Yeah, called, I think, Stoa, I think it was called. Yeah. So that's where they get their names. There was this group, this particular school of philosophers who would congregate at this porch, this Stoa in Athens, and they would teach. And it's interesting, they... like philosophy, I actually heard Ryan Holiday make this point. It's very true. Yeah. Like philosophy, a lot of time when we think of philosophers now, hopefully you think of Logos Podcast. But if you don't think of Logos Podcast, what you might think of is like this, college professor wearing glasses and
smoking a
pipe and just like an intellectual, just like kind of that philosophy is merely an abstract intellectual activity. In the ancient world, philosophy was a whole way of life. Right. So, and Stoicism was equally that. I mean, if you were a Stoic, you thought certain things to be true about reality, but it also entailed living a whole lifestyle.
Right.
And so that's what these guys who congregated at the Stoa in Athens were trying to espouse.
So what are some big names in this kind of philosophical system?
Yeah, so it was founded by a guy named Zeno of Citium, and he was a guy who lived in Athens. He was influenced by Plato's Academy. Yeah. So he was definitely familiar with thinkers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Right. He was in dialogue with their works. But he founded this school of Stoicism in around 300 BC. So, 300 years before Christianity. And then we also see throughout history kind of Cicero is a famous, into the Roman period. I don't think Cicero identified himself as a Stoic, but he was constantly dialoguing with Stoic thought. But then Seneca is a big name, and then the really famous one is Marcus Aurelius, who you mentioned.
Right. So his book, The Meditations, is kind of one of the ones that's more popular and reachable in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that's who Ryan Holiday draws on a lot. Yeah. And he's a fascinating figure because he was a Roman emperor and also a philosopher. And that book, The Meditations, was not written to be published. It was just his own, literally meditations to himself, kind of his own philosophy of life. And
which adds all the more credibility, I think,
Yeah,
to this
exactly.
work. Because it's
agree.
like, I didn't mean this for others to kind of take up popularly. He meant it as a kind of almost a journal, a memoir of a sorts. And so that's kind of thing there.
So those are the big names.
Right. Now, Stoicism does have kind of 3 interconnected branches.
Yeah.
Right. We're not going to focus on all of them. We are going to focus on the last one. And so here are the 3 interconnected branches: physics, logic, and ethics.
Yeah.
Ethics we're going to focus on because it seems to be the more popular one.
That's what people are. I mean, so
Right.
yeah, what is physics? When the Stoic philosophy had these 3 aspects: physics, logic, and ethics. Physics encapsulated a lot. It encapsulated really their whole view of the material
Correct.
world, of reality. It incorporated what we would think of today as like the natural sciences, right? And then logic, they had a whole system of logic as well, which involved, yes, logic, but also like philosophy of language, philosophy of coming to know things,
Correct.
epistemology.
Epistemology.
But then ethics is the practical. It's like, how do we live? Like, how do we, given everything that we think up to be true about reality,
Right.
how do we live the good life?
And so all these 3 throughout our conversation will kind of be presented, but ethics will be kind of the focus here.
And I think the answer is to live the good life, you just have to eat a lot of tacos.
And I think taquitos especial de mi abuelita y mi mamá.
If they would have just had tacos back then, they
Dude.
like all of this complicated, like none of it
That's
would have
right.
had to have happened.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think they were just eating lamb and gyros the whole time?
It would be fascinating to know what their diet consisted
That's
of.
right. I guess we'll have to go to Greece next year.
And also 2,000 years in history back in time.
Well, they have those machines now, you know?
They do. They're coming. They're
coming. All right.
Okay, so ethics. Let's talk about ethics, what they kind of considered to be essential. So for their ethical system, again, all ethics really, but especially Stoic ethics, is about living the good human life. It's really the goal of the Stoic lifestyle is to attain what they called eudaimonia,
Right.
which is really just means happiness. But happiness in that happiness in the sense of kind of like an inner tranquility and order. And in fact, they wanted to attune them. They said our end, the end towards which we're striving through these practices of Stoicism is, they would say, to live in accord with nature.
Right. So almost have like a energetic equilibrium, kind of like matching the wave of nature.
All of nature,
Right.
of all of reality. And interestingly enough, this has to do with their conception of God. So this is going to be very important for this whole conversation. But for the Stoics, God was actually, they would call him the Logos.
Right.
Interestingly enough, shout out Logos
What's up,
Podcast.
guys? So they were doing Logos Podcast before it was a thing on a Stoa porch. You feel me?
in Athens.
And so now we're doing it on our
Yeah.
seminary auditorium. So what would we call ourselves in that sense? The auditoriumists?
I'm going to rebrand
Okay.
this name. Okay, so for them, God and nature are kind of like the same thing, right? It's kind of this pantheistic idea. But God, the source of all reality, is, they can tell because they have brains, rational, right? And so there's order, there's rationality, there's harmony to everything they see.
Keep in mind, just a qualification, that the Greek and Roman philosophers took the natural world very seriously.
Yeah.
They were in tune with it in a way that I would say I think contemporary man is not. They took the natural world very serious, the way it operated, and kind of abstracted from that what we would call kind of a universal natural law.
Yeah, like their observation of
Yeah.
material reality was so much
Correct.
more particular and acute than mine is.
Right.
Because I just rely on science textbooks to tell me what
Or Google.
or Google, yeah.
Right.
Anyways, though, so God for the Stoics is this logos, this impersonal rationality that kind of imbues all of creation. And the Stoic thinks that in order to attain my end, like in order to live the good life, in order to be happy, to live in accord with nature, I have to conform my own inner logos, my reason, my rationality, to the logos, the rationality, the reason of the cosmos,
Right.
of creation. And so that's the goal. It's to attain this equilibrium, this inner harmony between my own logos and reason and the reason that permeates all things.
Right. So think about it like this. It's like we have a perception of reality, and we're trying to perceive in the way that the logos of nature is perceiving us.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like this intimacy between the logos of creation and my own perception of that logos. That
Yeah.
rationality.
Although intimacy There's certainly a conformity, intimacy, like it's impersonal. I think we want to clarify that, right?
Yeah, it's a good qualification.
Like I'm trying to, so we'll discuss that as we go. So that's the end. That's the goal of the Stoic ethic,
right?
Is that kind of happiness. Now, what are the means to attaining that end, according to the Stoics?
Right, so the means to attaining this eudaimonia, this happiness, telos, this end, whatever you want to call it, is twofold. One, virtue, and this is very important.
Yeah.
Right. And two is detachment.
Detachment, yeah.
Right. So the first is virtue, and by virtue they had the four what we would call now cardinal virtues.
Yeah.
Right.
So they had read Aristotle,
Correct.
who we've talked about all the time on this show.
Right.
But what are those again?
So it's prudence, right? Justice, temperance, and fortitude. Right. And so when we're talking, okay, how do we become happy? Well, we live out these four virtues.
Yeah.
Prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude.
And by living out these virtues through, again, repeated action, that's how you acquire virtue. The Stoics thought that process would naturally conform your mind to the logos, to
Correct.
nature, so that you could live properly in accordance with nature. Right. So that was kind of the goal.
Right.
And they also would have said that you need to study physics and logic so that you could really have an all-encompassing view and then live in accordance with that.
Again, that's amendable.
All of which is very reasonable, very rational.
Yeah.
Very
So like
good in a lot of ways.
How should we live our life? Well, we should kind of take our reason serious. We shouldn't let our emotions just go everywhere. We should kind of be in tune to what's going on. And how do we do that? Well, we enact these four virtues. That's how we do that.
Yeah, so there's virtue. That's the first way we attain this eudaimonia, this happiness, this equilibrium that we're trying to get at. But then the second way, and this is where, again, there's going to be some connection with Christianity here, but also some distinctions that we have to make. Correct. The second is in detachment. So for the Stoic, this is interesting. The only thing that's good in and of itself is virtue.
Boom. This is big time. Okay.
So things like health, things like riches, things like, I don't know, family, food, these things aren't good in and of themselves. They're just indifferent. So everything that's kind of out there in the world is not worth pursuing or spurning for its own sake.
Right.
And so what the Stoic wants to do, because the world, the external world is kind of outside of his control, is to detach himself from, I don't know, pursuing things that he thinks might be good, like health or
buying a car.
Yeah, or fearing things that he think might be harmful, like disease, right? If I just think correctly about the world, I will realize that these things in and of themselves do not inhibit or aid my ability to acquire virtue.
Now, this is interesting, right? Because taking this idea of perception again, which the Stoics do take very serious, the way we perceive the world will influence our passions. Does that make sense? And so, and this idea of detachment, if we see the external world as something good or bad, we're not attached, we're not thinking, our perspective is not properly ordered towards the virtues, but rather these other indifferent things.
Yeah.
Right.
So the Stoic, let's say someone is feeling distressed because they think they're going to get sick. The Stoic teacher would instruct this person and say, listen, the reason you're feeling distressed, the reason you're kind of not in this tranquility, you're not attaining this equilibrium of eudaimonia, is because you're inaccurately perceiving health as a good to be pursued. And so what you need to do is detach yourself from that. Right. And then you'll kind of reestablish this inner tranquility and order, and you won't be experiencing this passion of distress anymore. And so interestingly, for the Stoic, it's like, I can't control anything in the outside world, but what I can control is my mind and the way I perceive things.
Right, the way I perceive things, and also my body.
So that's okay. Talk about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I can change I can kind of change my passions in the way that I think, but also in the way that I live what I'm thinking. If that makes sense. Right. And so in disciplining my body, I can discipline my mind, or I should say vice versa. In disciplining my mind, I can discipline my body so as to act a certain way. What way? Ordered towards the four virtues, not towards these indifferent goods, or bads.
Yeah. So I mean, this was part of the Stoic practice, is treating the body harshly, treating the body rigorously, in order to detach yourself from fear of things that aren't actually bad in and of themselves, right?
And then kind of ordering our body and ordering our mind, then we're more disposed to living out what's truly good, which is justice, prudence,
virtues.
temperance, and fortitude. Right.
Exactly.
And so they would have, in a certain way, not completely, and I don't want to kind of undermine the philosophy because I do think it's very powerful in a lot of ways, they would have kind of neglected the good passions as well as pain and suffering.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit, the good passions.
Right. And so I'm going to draw here on Dietrich von Hildebrand.
Okay.
I've been reading his book called The Heart,
Mm-hmm.
The Center of Tender Affectivity, if you want to know the full title. He talks about in this book the emphasis on the passions, right? And one of his kind of, the book starts by saying, hey, for a long time in the philosophical tradition, we've been placing emphasis on the mind and rationality, and it's good, and it's necessary, and it's important.
Kind of like the Stoics would have, right?
Right. So, mind over body, over
Mm-hmm.
passions. But he says, but wait a second, it turns out the feelings or passions can actually tell us something objective and good about the world. So it's not just the mind without the passions or without the body, but rather it's the mind with the body together, kind of energized, to use kind of Stoic language, or equalized towards the value before you. And so he kind of distinguished 3 levels of feelings, the last of which is where I'm at in the book now, he calls tender affectivity, which is a sort of spiritual feeling. Right, but it's not just like a fluctuating emotion, like, oh, raging anger, or raging, or, sorrow, like, deep sorrow. It was more so like, kind of has this relationship of the mind and the heart, in the sense that your passions fluctuate according to the value of the thing.
In that sense, they're objective. They're corresponding to the
Correct.
objective world.
Right. And he would even use the word, we're moving towards the nature of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for example, if a mother is overjoyed at her newborn in her arms, that's a good thing.
That's proper.
That's
right?
proper, because that's her heart and her mind recognizing the value and attuning herself to that value.
Yeah.
Right. Or if a family member of ours, God forbid, pass away and I am sorrowing, that's a good thing. I should grieve.
Yeah.
If I'm not, then I'm not living a human existence.
Right.
Right.
So the Stoic would say, like, the baby dies and he's grieving, so he's experiencing distress. He's out of equilibrium, if you will.
Correct.
He's not experiencing this eudaimonia.
Right, because
moment.
Because he should be ordered, like, wait a second, yes, the baby passed away, but I could have another baby.
Or what he would really be thinking is that baby in and of itself was not good, and so therefore I should be detached enough from that baby to not be experiencing pain and sorrow when that baby is taken away from me, right? And I should habituate myself and prepare myself for a moment like that by treating myself rigorously, right? And undergoing hard things, sleeping outside in the cold like Marcus Aurelius did. But what you're saying, Dietrich von Hildebrand is saying, and I think the gospel, the Christian worldview would agree with, is that the baby is a good thing.
It is.
And when the baby dies, it's proper for you and good for you to grieve.
Correct.
And that doesn't actually have to take away from an authentically flourishing human life, a life of joy.
Yeah, and it reminds me too of, like, think about when our Lord felt compassion.
Yeah.
Right. There's that passage, and I can't remember which gospel it is, but it says our Lord felt compassion at the crowd.
He was moved with pity for them.
Right. Because why? Because they were exhausted, they were confused.
They were like sheep without a shepherd.
They were like sheep without a shepherd. Why? What was our Lord? Why would our Lord, who is God, who is man, fully in the divine person, why did he feel anything? Well, it's because he recognized the value of the crowd, the value of the people that compose that crowd. In other words, his heart and his mind were attuned fully to the
authentic value
Correct.
in the world, right?
And so here we have the Stoics kind of living a sort of detachment that I think is criticizable to a certain extent.
So we'll talk, okay, yeah, so that's good. So now that we've kind of laid that groundwork, that's kind of Stoicism in broad strokes. Now let's talk about specifically Stoicism and Christianity, because it turns out these two things encountered each other in history, right? In fact, in the Acts of the Apostles, St. Paul encounters Stoic philosophers when he goes to Athens, right? And we have many writings of the church fathers who were in dialogue with Stoic philosophers. Again, these guys were living in Rome.
The Areopagus.
Living around this area during that time. And I think St. Ambrose maybe especially, or I think St. Ambrose had to dialogue and wrote a lot about Stoicism.
Correct.
And what's interesting is the Christians, these church fathers, the first generations of Christians who had received the revelation of God in Christ, saw this pagan philosophy, saw this Stoicism being practiced and taught, and saw a lot of really good elements in it.
Correct.
Right? So they saw things like virtue. They saw things like disciplining the body in a certain sense, which they thought were good and necessary. Correct. Our Lord did that. He went out into the desert. He fasted, right? They saw things like living in accord with right reason, right? All these things they thought were very, very good. And even detachment, to a certain extent, they saw as a good thing.
Right. And what's coming to mind is St. Paul in Romans chapter 12, right? He has this idea, right? So I just want to read you a couple verses coming from Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. St. Paul writes, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercy of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, pleasing unto God, your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be reformed in the newness of your mind, that you may prove what is the good and the acceptable and the perfect will of God. So there's that notion.
Be transformed in the newness of your mind. Be transformed by the renewal of your minds.
Right.
So St. Paul is saying, in order to flourish, you are going to need to, adjust the way that you perceive reality.
Correct.
You're going to need to be transformed by the renewal of your minds. The difference between St. Paul, though, and the Stoic is the Stoic thinks, I'm just going to consciously switch the way I look at the world and detach myself from it, and then I'm going to be good.
Correct.
For St. Paul, the transformation of our minds comes through the light of grace, which is infused into us by God.
Right.
That actually gives us the new spiritual vision with which we can see the world and assess it accurately in accordance with the truth.
Right.
So when it comes to this encounter between Christians and Stoics, Christians, again, they affirm a lot of what the Stoics say. But there's one fundamental difference.
There is.
And it's the fundamental difference between Christianity and Stoicism, and that's actually the perception of God. That's actually the understanding of God.
Right. And their perception of God influenced a lot of what became a philosophical system, anthropology, epistemology. And so they had this kind of separation, I would say, in how one relates to God. Right?
Yeah, so for the Stoic, I mean, God, we said, he's the logos. Yes, he's this reason that from which all things come and which kind of imbues all of reality. But he's impersonal. It's just kind of this force that is, correct, I don't know, equivalent with nature. So for the Stoic, he's just trying to achieve, like we said, this equilibrium in accordance with nature, in accordance with the logos, in accordance with what they called God. And that's kind of it.
Right.
In Christianity, yes, God is the logos. This is what's written on the first page of the Gospel of John, right?
That's right.
In the beginning was the logos, the word. But for Christians, the word, the logos, is not just an impersonal force.
No, because
behind
what does
all
the rest
things.
of that verse say?
And the word became flesh.
And the word became flesh.
This is, I mean, the objective meaning that undergirds all things is a subject. That's what Ratzinger says in Introduction to Christianity.
So beautiful, man.
The logos that became flesh is a person. So the Christian is trying to unite himself to the logos, yes, but it's not an impersonal force with which he's trying to attain equilibrium.
No.
The logos that he's trying to unite himself to is a person.
Why? Because man is a person.
Created by this person.
Correct.
And for whom he's created to be in union with in love. So it's the Christian is trying to live a relationship of love with God, of intimate union, which is an adventure, and which doesn't just result in an impersonal equilibrium of tranquility in my heart. It results in an enthralling immersion in the triune God.
Right, and it's not an undisciplined love. It's not a disordered happiness. It's not disordered passions, and it's not ludicrous ideology.
That's
it's
important.
real.
Yeah.
Right. So the Stoics would have held that the logos is real, but is impersonal. The Christian notion of God would be that he's also real, but he's personal.
And he's love.
And he dwelt among us, and he draws us into that very mystery, which we call love. Right. And that's very important.
Very important. So, and it has consequences for the Christian life. So the Christian, again, sees the Stoic practicing detachment, let's say, from things of this world, right? And the Christian, Christians in many ways are like, yeah, we do need to be detached from things of this world. But why? Why do we not attach ourselves to created finite realities? It's not just to achieve this inner order and tranquility.
Right.
It's so that we can attach ourselves to the one necessary thing.
Summum bonum.
The summum bonum, the highest good, which is God. And that one necessary thing, again, is a person. So the Christian, I think of St. John of the Cross. I think of these saints who undertake extraordinary penances, right? Why are they doing that? Not just to subjugate their bodies, although that is a part of the Christian spirituality as well.
Yeah.
But they're doing it to teach themselves to cling to nothing in this world and cling solely to the cross of Jesus Christ. To cling solely to him who died for us, who gave his life for us, and who wants to and is continually seeking to pour himself into us. This is why the Christian is practicing detachment.
Correct.
It's not impersonal. It's a love affair.
And it's not just about turning the perceptive or the perception. It's about an exchange of persons.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Which is why it's so important in one of the points, I guess, to criticize Stoicism. One of the downfalls, we think, is the fact that it leaves the good, the logos, something to be impersonally achieved. Whereas we're saying, no, in fact, the logos is a person, and we're called to not only change our minds and bodies somehow to, again, reach that energy, but to actually fall in love. And that requires a rational assent, but also an assent of the heart.
Yeah,
we have
that's
that,
well said. Yeah.
We have that in the Mass, right? One of the beautiful things we say in the Mass is sursum corda, lift up your hearts.
Oh, yeah.
Right? My bishop actually has that as his motto, which I think is baller.
Is that right?
But I'm like, lift up your hearts. My goodness, what a command that is. Because, and even just yesterday, we celebrated Divine Mercy Sunday. Interesting. We have the side of Christ. By the way, the side that Eve was created out of, pierced. Why? For love of man.
Yeah.
Because he shows us that how close does he want us? Right next to him. Right next to him. And it's not something that's impersonal. Again, the word became flesh. Right? The word became flesh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm thinking the Stoic encounters a difficult situation in his life, a challenge.
Right.
And what's cool about Stoicism and what's very good about Stoicism is the Stoic does say, okay, here's a challenge that's before me that's disrupting this inner tranquility.
Yeah.
I actually do have power to change the way I'm looking at this challenge, right? I have the capacity to see this challenge not as an obstacle, not as something to fear, but actually as an opportunity to grow, something to confront and through which I can grow in virtue.
In all humility, the Stoics also hold that there are things outside of their control, right? So some things are in their control, and those things which are in your control, you have the duty to then order towards what they would consider the virtues, or what is virtue. But there are things outside of your control. And so with Joey, and what we're going to talk about is those things which are in your control.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm even thinking of something that's outside my control, right? Okay, so I'm thinking of like, let's say a family member dies and or let's say, take a different example. Let's say I have to,
you see an injustice.
I don't know. No, let's say like illness. Illness is a good example. Let's say I'm confronted with illness, like I get sick. The Stoic thinks, okay, here's this thing that's happening to me that's difficult, that's arduous. I can interpret this and dread it and hate it as this terrible thing and let it cripple me, or I can use the power of my mind to think about this differently. I can say, okay, this is an illness, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow in strength, in inner fortitude, in virtue, right? And that's a very good thing.
It is.
What's different about the Christian approach? Because the Christian would do a similar thing in that situation. But the Christian would say, this is actually an evil, a genuine evil, not just an indifferent thing that doesn't actually matter, that I just have to think about differently. This is a genuine evil. But it's a genuine evil that God, in his permissive will, is allowing me to undergo. Why? So that I can unite myself to him in my suffering and therefore grow in deeper love and union with the crucified Christ.
And this is also what I would say differentiates the good person from the Christian. The Christian person offers suffering in redemptive love back to the Father. Whereas a good person doesn't do that. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, like the person, I just want to be a good person.
Yeah, I want to be a good
person. The
person.
In many ways is probably a good person. I mean, they're
probably an excellent person.
Yeah, they're trying to live an ordered life. They're trying to live virtue. And and in many respects, they are doing that, which is why I think Ryan Holiday, guys like this, are having so much success out there and helping people in many ways. But the gospel takes it further because it's not just changing your inner disposition towards a thing to make yourself feel better. It's uniting yourself in love to the God who created you and who is trying to save you precisely through allowing this evil, which is which has the capacity to transform your heart.
And that also shows the dignity of the human person, because it also says, hey, actually, it turns out man has a say in this order, this natural order. Man can actually cooperate with kind of the orchestration of providence.
Yeah, it's true.
He doesn't just have to submit himself as some sort of slave to this kind of reason. He actually can live and love it, it turns out.
Yeah, and as St. Paul says, I now fill up in my body what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ, right?
Exactly.
We can participate in Christ's very act of redeeming the world through the cross by union with him.
Correct.
And that's a love matter. That's it's what's missing from Stoicism is love, I think. And that's because, to be fair, the Stoics didn't have the revelation of the triune God, who is love, right? We are privileged to have received that revelation in Jesus Christ, who revealed the Father and the Spirit.
Did you almost say his name in Latin?
Maybe I did subconsciously, but.
Or maybe you're going to say Jesus?
Jesus Cristo. Anything else to add at this point?
No, I think one of the major things to keep in mind here, I think, when engaged in Stoicism, and again, sometimes we can come off maybe, at least I think so. Sometimes maybe we can come off as just critical, hardcore, but I don't think that's not what we're trying to do.
No,
certainly not with Stoicism. And in fact, as Joey and I were kind of preparing, kind of rehashing some of the stuff we'd studied in our undergrad and kind of learning some new things as well.
Yeah.
We were both like, oh wow,
this stuff is good.
Yeah, maybe we should pick some of this up ourselves, you know, and. But I think there are some real points of contention and to be considered critically when engaging with this, which is one of the reasons why we are motivated to talk about it, because as we've reiterated time and time again, ideas have consequences and they affect us in real life. And when we think that philosophy is just kind of some weird, as Joey was kind of introducing, if we just think philosophy is some weird kind of just abstract base of principles, then we're missing the whole point. And I think one of the things, again, amendable of the Stoic person, oftentimes trying to live out the Stoic philosophy, is that they take ideas seriously because they recognize that reason actually should inform the way we live our lives.
Yeah.
Right. But we would take it a step further. It's not just reason, it's also the heart.
Yeah.
Right. It's reason in tune with the heart. It's both at the same time coming together because we're people, we're persons aimed and created by a person.
Yeah. Okay. So now maybe what we can do, just as a fun little exercise is
that because Stoics exercise?
Just because they exercise so hard, dude.
We're going to let's do it.
Now what we're going to do, let's go plunge ourselves into, I don't know, freezing cold water. We already did that.
We did that. What's up?
We're Stoics. It is funny. Never mind.
Is it funny? Because I don't know what you were thinking. So it's funny to you? So is it really funny if the other people don't know the joke? That's a philosophical question.
So this guy, Ryan Holiday, who runs this YouTube channel called The Daily Stoic, has written a bunch of books. He's a popular speaker on Stoicism out there nowadays. Got a lot of good stuff. I thought we could I watched one of his videos and took like a few quotes, principles that he's laying out for his listeners, Stoic principles. So I thought we could just read them and say what we think about them. Say what's good, say what could be brought to perfection in the light of the gospel. So the first one, he quotes Seneca, who says, "Treat the body rigorously so that it not be disobedient to the mind. The mind must assert itself over the body to teach it who's in charge." What do you think about that?
I do think one of the things that's undermined there again is that, well, first I want to say,
what's good about it?
Yeah, I think what's good about it is that your body does sometimes need discipline. Like you can't just, when you want a piece of pizza, get up and go get a piece of pizza. When you want pizza rolls, you can't just go in the microwave and heat your pizza rolls up. Okay, you low fatty. All right, I'm speaking to myself really. Sorry. And so like there has to be some sort of discipline because the rational order is important and we have to engage. We can't just let our passions go wild.
Yeah. In fact, I didn't plan on having this up, but I was actually reading this before, the last thing I read before we went down to visit your folks was here on my computer. And so this article's still up. It's a chapter from Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. And he says this, talking about fasting. He says, "If you are able to fast, you will do well to observe some days beyond that ordered by the church. For besides the ordinary effect of fasting in raising the mind, subduing the flesh, confirming goodness, and obtaining a heavenly reward, it is also a great matter to be able to control greediness and to keep the sensual appetites and the whole body subject to the law of the Spirit. And although we may be able to do but little, the enemy nevertheless stands more in awe of those whom he knows can fast."
That's interesting. You know what else I'm thinking?
What?
Let's say I go through a breakup.
Yeah.
And I'm just like sad all the time. And I never actually take the time to assess why I'm sad. I'm just kind of sitting in my room pouting, listening to Drake or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, what's another, like Taylor Swift.
T Swift, the old T Swift.
The old T Swift, which we listen to some at my house.
He's the reason for the...
Hey, unnecessary. Sorry. Okay, sorry, guys. Anyways, we forget that, in fact, our mind is in charge. And also, guess what? That our mind can take us out of dark places. We have the potential to live in the light.
Yeah.
But if we only live and allow our body to continually go there, right? I don't know, going to eat whatever, smoking whatever, taking whatever substance, drinking a bunch of alcohol, eating, an unhealthy life, then we're just going to kind of live in this kind of almost depressive state rather than actually seeing the potential of, hey, I can live a normal life. Yeah, it's hard, but I can work around this.
Not just normal, virtuous. Like we would say, like the church says, human beings are fallen, so we experience concupiscence. So in order to combat that concupiscence, these disordered desires that we have, we do have to discipline ourselves.
Correct.
We do have to, we practice self-denial. We have to deny ourselves, take up our cross daily, and follow Christ. But so when the Stoics say treat the body rigorously so that it not be disobedient to the mind, that's like good. The question is, why are you doing it? Right. For the Stoic, it's merely to achieve self-mastery. It's merely to, again, attain this kind of equilibrium. For the Christian, it's to free myself to love Jesus Christ more fully.
And that was going to be my criticism. It's like, hey, it should be purposive. What is our purpose? Summum bonum, the highest good, which is in relationship to God. Okay, here's another quote by a boy, Ryan Holiday. Focus on what you can control. I think that's pretty straightforward.
I like that quote.
Me too.
In fact, I've used that quote before.
Nice.
That's advice I would give to somebody.
Oh, so it's good because you used it?
No, I'm saying
I'm just kidding.
It's so good that I would, in fact, use it.
And it's true.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that you can't control. And in fact, I think an infatuation with the things you can't control, such as what people think of you, for example.
Exactly.
Can almost cause you to live paralytically.
Yeah.
Almost like a crutched existence. Where it's like, hey, there's certain things. People are going to say things about you. People are going to hate on you. The haters are always going to be out there. But also there's a lot of people that support you. There's a lot of people that love you. And focus on those things you can control. Maybe I have a particularity I need to work on. So work on it. Yeah. Maybe it's a particularity I can't fix because I was born with it. And so let it be. Yeah. Excel in what you were given.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you hear about this. I'm thinking of Brother Lawrence, the resurrection, the practice of the presence of God. Like really, all you have to, like the present moment, living in the present moment, receiving everything that God is allowing to happen to you or giving to you as a gift and pursuing it. That's focusing on what you can control, but in union with the beloved, in union with God, who is ordaining all things to bring you in union with him. So that's like, focus on what you control. That's really good. The next level is realize that everything that comes to you is coming to you from God in one way or another. Yeah. So, let's see. Here's another one. I would say this is a good one. Another Stoic principle, memento mori.
Hey.
What are your thoughts on that?
You know what comes to mind actually?
Which means remember death. Yeah. Remember your death.
And actually there's a famous kind of Carthusian phrase that says frater memento mori. Brother, remember your death. And it's written, from what I hear, at the front of the entrance into their monastery. Yeah. And one of the traditions that I've heard they have is that every morning after their morning prayers, all the brothers have to go outside with a spoon and scoop a little hole, little patch of dirt out and throw it into a bucket. And so they do that in the morning and before they go to bed. The idea being that they're making their own grave.
And don't they build their own caskets?
Correct. Right. And so that's fascinating to think about why it reminds them of their mortality, something that I think we could all do well to remember.
So the Stoics recognized as much, right?
Right. And so remember your death. Why? Because we're limited beings in a lot of ways. And, but with the eternal capacity to be in union with God.
Right. So why would the Stoics say memento mori? Well, it's because actually by remembering the fact that you're limited, that you're finite, that you're mortal,
better hurry up and
that brings a lot of wisdom, right? That brings that changes your approach to life when you remember that I'm finite, that my life is not going to last forever. But if you're a Christian, why has the church adopted this memento mori in her religious traditions?
Well, because in light of Jesus Christ, we have an eternal capacity.
Yes.
Right? We're reminded that death does not have the last word.
That this world is not our home.
Yeah. Death, where is your sting?
Yeah.
You know, again, and Jesus Christ and the resurrection, by the way, which we celebrate today, reminds us of this. Hey, we're not limited to the confines of this earthly realm.
So again, this is another idea of a good Stoic principle that has a lot of wisdom for living in the world, but that the Christian version of this, the Christian kind of perfection of this principle, takes it to that HNL.
The whole nother level. Y'all write that down, okay? HNL, whole nother level, marketed by Max.
Okay, so here's maybe the last one we'll talk about. The obstacle is the way. You can always grow in virtue regardless of external circumstances. Actually, Ryan Holiday has a tattoo on his forearm that says, the obstacle is the way. What do you think of that?
Okay, a few things. One thing, the good. There are things in life that are difficult to endure, but that we can come out on the other side having grown and developed in it. Right? I'm thinking now, working out, for example.
Yeah.
Why are you sore in the mornings after you work out? It's because muscles have
you're
torn.
Soft. Just kidding.
Here I thought I was about to go into something strong and deep, and well, that's it for me. Why is yeah, think about working out, right? So like your muscles tear, new tissues growing, new muscles are developing. Things get better. You get bigger. The more you do that, the bigger you get, the healthier you become. The more you run. Running is hard. I hate it.
Arduous.
It's hard. Joey, you hate running.
I'm not a runner.
I'm not a runner either, and I've tried it. There's been a time where you're like, oh well, if you run enough, then you'll
start to love it.
Yeah, it's like, dude, I ran for 4 months straight and hated every single day of it. Okay?
Every step
of the way. I was like, God, why did you do this to us? Oh my goodness! And I'm glad that just tigers aren't chasing me, because I would have died. I would have been the first one of the pack to go.
Yeah.
Okay, but my point being here that like there are obstacles that we can get over to make us better people, but also, I would say one of the things that maybe is a little lacking in this is the fact that virtue does not depend on the difficulty. Virtue, actually, the virtuous man is a man who's living a life of joy and is doing the good thing with ease.
That is a good, I wasn't even thinking of that, but that's really, yeah.
Right? And so the obstacle is the way, yes, in one sense, but in another sense, actually freedom is the way.
Yeah, so I mean,
right?
this is I think the rationale behind this phrase, "the obstacle is the way," is what we've already mentioned. I'm confronted with something difficult, and I can either look at that thing as an obstacle that's in my way, or I can look at that thing as an opportunity through which I can grow, like exercising, which is why it's good to kind of undergo arduous tasks. That's why people try to run marathons and do these things. It's because they grow through that difficulty.
Correct.
And then they train themselves to see more difficulties not as obstacles to be feared and dreaded, but as opportunities through which they can grow.
Correct.
But this is actually really interesting. Who's more virtuous? The man who sees the piece of cake and has to like restrain and fight and like hold back and do everything he can not to reach out and grab it, and does that successfully, so he's kind of undergone that obstacle? Or the man who sees the piece of cake and isn't even tempted to eat it.
And in fact wants to offer it to somebody else
and
because
is
maybe
joyful in doing that.
Exactly.
So that's true virtue. So again, the goal is not to just experience difficulty for its own sake, right? No. The goal is to, yes, through the experience of difficulty, through undergoing trials virtuously, attain an inner freedom and joy that frees us to love and serve. So
that's all I have for that one, homie.
I think that's good. I think we've said a lot.
I think we have too.
Closing remarks, I mean, closing thoughts, considerations, Stoicism and the gospel.
No, I think we've kind of.
I have some, so I'm going to let you go first.
Fair enough. No, I think for what we've said, I am sufficed. I am satisfied.
So, what would you say to someone who's out there hearing Ryan Holiday, hearing Andrew Tate, hearing Joe Rogan talk about Stoicism and advocating for it?
Don't be soft. No, this is actually funny because actually von Hildebrand does say something about this. He goes, oftentimes this idea of subduing the passions comes off in the phrase "don't be soft." Yeah, and it's like, no, I do mean it. Like, it's okay to feel what man feels, and live the way man is supposed to live. This is one of Blessed Giussani's big things. The man is called to live what man feels, and so how are you human? How are you truly happy? How are you truly in love? It's because you live and do what man does. And it's not necessarily kind of the submissive to something. It's a freeing, joyful existence. And so if you're picking up Stoicism, right, I advise you to also pick up the gospel, right, and to be informed by that, because I think there's a lot of good in Stoicism. But I would say that the gospel actually takes you into the HNL,
Yeah, that's well said. So I was going to say, to people who are hearing this stuff and maybe benefiting from it, maybe being helped by it, that's good. That's fine. That's like, this is the different, like, grace perfects nature. That's the principle. Faith perfects reason, right? So man, by his own natural capacity, can discover true things about reality and about how to live his life. And the Stoics did that to a very high extent, right?
Which is why they're so popular. One of the reasons they're so popular, I think, is because they have so many universal truths.
So there is genuine truth and genuine goodness. So it's possible that you're listening to Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan, and even though you're not agreeing with everything they say, when they're talking about Stoicism, they sound pretty legit, and it's kind of wise.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Take what's good, reject what's bad, but know that the fullness, that like the perfection, that thing that is going to supersede even what Stoicism can give you, is a life in union with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, man.
So don't be afraid of that.
Don't be afraid. JP2's big motto. Guys, thank you all for tuning into this episode of Logos Podcast. We hope you all enjoyed it. We hope you all learned something. And above all, we hope you did grow in intimacy with our Lord Jesus Christ, the Logos. So guys, that's it for today's episode. And as always, God bless.